Hello, it's Julie from Spellbound again, and today I'm going to show you how to make this lovely bee visiting a sunflower necklace. It's really simple to make and really cute. Now we've actually shown you how to make the bee on a previous video. In this video I'm going to show you how to just quickly adapt it so that we can use it to attach to our flower. I'm then going to show you how to make the flower and make the connections to the necklace. Now we need a few different ingredients. For the bees, we've got size 15 seed beads for the stripes. We've got a bronze and we've got a shiny metallic gold. I've also got a shiny metallic silver to make the wings. And to make the structure that supports the stripes and the wings, we've got some size 11 seed beads in a matte black. I've got a 4mm faceted bead and one size 6 in black. So that we can join the bee to the flower, I've got a soldered jump ring. This is a 4mm jump ring. To make the flower, I've got an 8mm candy bead. That's a bead that's domed in cross section and it has 2 parallel threading holes. That means we'll get a nice neat back to the flower and it will be comfortable to wear. We're going to use the same shiny gold seed beads for one layer of petals, and I've got this lovely matte gold for the front layer of the petals. And to finish everything off, I'm using a finished chain. Now, a finished chain is a chain that's already got the clasp attached, and I'm just going to cut that in the middle so I can add our motif. This chain I'm using is 18 inches long, which is about 45 centimetres. I hope you'll join me making this lovely little design. The first thing we're going to make is the bee. Now I'm not going to show you the whole process of making the bee because that's already been covered by Vicky in a previous video, and you'll see the link for Vicky's video in the description for this project. However, I am going to show you how it's adapted so that we can link it onto the sunflower we're going to make in a moment. Now, when you're making the bee, it has a little grid of size 11 seed beads underneath that help to support the stripes. It also has a size 6 seed bead for the thorax and a 4mm bead for the head. Now in Vicky's video it will add the head horizontally so the hole runs side to side across the body of the bee. For this purpose though, we need to be able to add a jump ring to the top of the head. So when you're following Vicky's video, when she gets to the point where you put on the thorax and the abdomen, you put on the size 6 seed bead and the 4mm faceted bead for the head. Now instead of passing back down the size 6 seed bead to pull the head horizontally, we're going to thread on a soldered jump ring and we're going to go back down the 4mm bead and back down the other column on the main structure that supports the stripes, the underside of the body. And you can see there that now the 4mm bead sits upright with the jump ring already attached. And if I bring in the bee we're going to use that's been completed, you can see there's the jump ring at the top. I've finished off the tail end of the thread and I've left the long end of the thread emerging from this single seed bead at the very bottom of the bee body. If you can get your bead to that stage and put it aside, and then you'll be able to make the flower. Now that I've got my complete bee, I'm ready to start making my sunflower. Now the sunflower is based around a candy bead. Now a candy bead's got 2 parallel holes and is button shaped in profile, so it will lie nice and flat against the skin. And I've got my 2 finishes of gold beads here. I've got the frosty one and I've got the shiny one. I'm going to make 2 layers of petals. This will be my first layer. This will be a shorter layer of petals, and the shiny ones will be my back layer, which will be slightly longer. Now, as before, when we made the daisy pendant, I'm going to be putting straps of thread around the edge of the candy bead and then brick stitching a row of beads all the way around that thread row to provide a support for my petals. I've got my needle prepared, and this time I'm using a size 12 needle because I'm going to have to pass through these beads quite a few times, so I need it to be a fine needle. Right, pass through the first hole on the candy bead and pass through the same hole again, and that will make a strap down the side of the candy bead. Now be careful not to pull it too tight or it will slide to the back. Just make sure there's enough tension so that it sits on the edge, and repeat that stitch. So that's 2 straps of thread. Up the other parallel hole, and you can see I'm making a strap of thread along the bottom. Down the first one, making a strap of thread along the top, back down the second one. This time I'm going to put 2 straps on this edge. So that's 1, 2 passes of the needle, and I've only got 1 thickness of thread there. So there we go. So I've made 8 stitches, and that's given me 2 thicknesses of thread between the holes all the way around. I'm now going to stitch around this frame of thread to add my first layer of seed beads. I'm going to be working in the matte gold, and I just want to make sure that the beads I pick up all have got really nice round and as generous as possible holes. I don't want to pick up any by mistake that have got a slightly smaller hole. That one, for instance, has got a slightly smaller hole than, for instance, that one. So I'm not going to pick up that one, I'm going to pick up that one instead. It's just because I'm going to have to pass through these particular beads several times, so let's avoid any potential problems by weeding out any beads that might have smaller holes. I'm going to start with 2 seed beads for my first brick stitch, and I'm going to pick up thread adjacent to the hole in the candy bead. I'm going to pass under both thicknesses of thread, pull through, and I want the beads to sit side by side with the holes pointing outwards, and then I'm going to go back up through the second bead I put on, so I point away from the candy bead. So it's slightly strange, the first stitch, but you can see that the threads come out between beads number 1 and bead number 2, but both beads are sitting flat against the edge of the candy bead. I'm going to repeat, this time just with 1 bead. So under the strap, you can see I've made a loop of thread across the top there and up through the bead I've just put on. And that's the next bead along. And you can see I'm starting to build up a little row of 3 seed beads. 1 bead on, under the thread loop and back up the bead I've just put on. And that's 4 beads in a row. That's 5. And let's have a look. I can probably fit one more on, but don't cram them in too tight. What we're aiming for is a total of 16 beads all the way around. And when we did the daisy, we actually put 18 beads all the way around, but because we're going through these beads several times, it's easier if there's one less petal to make. You'll be able to get your needle in more easily, and because we're doing a double layer, we can get away with an with an even number of petals more easily. For some reason, odd numbers of petals always look better, but as we're doing 2 layers, 2, 4, 6, 8, so I've got 8 there, we'll be able to get away with doing an even number of petals. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. So if possible, I want to spread 7 seed beads around the rest. That's 10. 11, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. One more to go. That's 16. I need to join number 16 to number 1, so I go down number 1 and back up number 16. I just ease the beads around slightly so they're slightly better spaced around my candy bead. There's a bit of a gap there, but that will disappear when we do our petals. So now we've got our first row of beads on. They've been brick stitched into place, and that's given us a frame of beads to support our petals. Now the first row of petals don't take very many beads at all. We're going to put on 4 beads, back down bead number 3. I'm going to hold bead number 4 under my fingernail there, so as I pull through, that little anchor bead, which is bead number 4, pulls up tight to bead number 3, and I'm going to put on 2 seed beads, which matches the other side of the petal there, and down the next seed bead around the edge of the candy bead, and that's a little petal. Up the next seed bead around, and put on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we do the same again. Back down number 3. Let's hold bead number 4 under our fingernail. It makes a nice neat anchor. And then 2 seed beads to come back to the brick stitch ring, and we go down the next bead along and up the following bead. Do one more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull number 4 out of the way, back down number 3. Let's get that little loop of thread sorted. There we go. So let's hold on to bead number 4, pull, and that pulls it up to bead number 3 and 2 seed beads on. As you can see, I've got 3 little petals towards my first row of my sunflower. I'm going to finish this row and I'll be straight back to you. So I've worked all the way around my candy bead and I've added 8 petals. As you can see, it already resembles a little sunshine. Now I'm going to add the second layer of petals in this shiny gold. Now these are going to go behind the first layer and they're going to be slightly longer. They're also going to fit in the gaps between these petals rather than directly behind them. So I'll be making 8 petals to go in the 8 gaps. These beads are also supported on the layer of brick stitch beads we put around the outside of the candy bead, which is why I was saying we wanted, if possible, to avoid picking any beads for that row with particularly small holes, because we're going to be going through those beads again. Now before I start this row, I also need to have to hand my chain and my bee, as the chain is going to be attached to one side directly to the tip of a petal, and the bee, this little jump ring here, is also going to be connected directly to the top of one of these shiny gold petals. Now I've prepared the chain. I've had a little look at it. I've decided how long I want my necklace to be, and if I'd just cut the chain in half directly, it would have been a little bit too long for my necklace. So I've actually removed a short section. Now my flower and my bee together, when we're all linked up, is going to be between 3.5 and 4 centimetres long. So with that measurement in mind, you might want to remove this short section from the front of your neck chain too. I'll pop that to one side and move the bee and the chain a minute so we can start on our first petal. Now at the moment the needle is coming out of this seed bead here of the brick stitch, so that petal was my last petal, and I pass down through that seed bead. Now to start the next petal, I'm going to pass up through the bottom brick stitch bead on the first petal I made, and I'm going to emerge at the back of the candy bead. Now on this particular candy bead you can see it's the back because you can see the 2 channels of thread running through, but it's basically the flat side of the candy bead. And there we are, pulled through. Now my first petal is going to be 6 beads long, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to make the top of the petal exactly the same as before, so I pull out the top bead, which in this case is bead number 6, back through bead number 5 and pull through. Now I need the same number of beads on as I've got on this side of the petal leading back down to the centre, which is 4, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And remember, I want to bridge across this gap here, so I don't want to go that way, I want to go that way. So I'm going to the first brick stitch bead on the next petal around. I'm going to pass down through that bead. There we go. If I turn it over, you can see that the petal is sitting between those two on the first row. Flip to the back again and up through the next brick stitch bead around, which is that one there. Now on my first layer, all these petals were unconnected to one another. They're connected to the ring but not connected to each other. On this back row, I need to actually connect the petals together as well. So we're going to do a little stitch 2 beads up from the bottom. So I'm going to put on the first 2 beads of my next petal, and I'm going to count 2 seed beads up the near side of the previous petal and pass down that bead number 2 back towards the candy bead. And then I'm going to pass up my new number 2 bead away from the candy bead. And that makes a little square stitch which joins those 2 petals together at the base. I need to make sure everything's pulled up tight to the brick stitch. I've got a little bit of thread showing there, so I'm just going to make sure everything's pulled up tight. That's it. Now I finish my petal. So I've already got the first 2 beads on, so I add take out the top one, back through the next one, down, and complete the petal. 1, 2, 3, 4 beads, and down through the next brick stitch bead around. And let's flip it over, and now you can see we've got 2 petals in the gaps between the previous row. Now we're going to start number 3. So it's up through the next brick stitch around. That's a bit tight, but it needs a little bit of a pull. I need 2 seed beads on, and I'm going to do that link again to the previous flower petal. So it's down through the second to last bead of the previous petal, and that's towards the candy bead. Make sure everything's pulled up nice and tight, and I go back up through bead number 2 away from the candy bead. I'm effectively making a square stitch. Pull it nice and tight, and then 4 beads to go up to the tip of my petal, which makes 6 in total with the first 2. Now at this position, instead of making the standard point on the end of the petal, I'm actually going to join on the bee. So let's bring the bee in. We're going to join to the ring end of the bee. Just untangle the threads, because the bee has got a thread attached to its bottom as well. I'm going to go through the jump ring on the nose of the bee, and then I'm going to go down the last 2 beads I put on of the petal. So that's the anchor bead and the next bead down where we would normally pass through. Pull that up nice and tight, and then it's 4 beads to complete the petal. 4 seed beads, and down the next brick stitch. Just make sure those beads come to the back of the... Let's flip it over, and you can see now that the bee is attached to the sunflower, and it's the same length petal because we put those 2 beads on, exactly the same as we've got 2 beads at the end of the previous petal. Now I'm going to continue around and add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 new petals, but this 5th one I'm going to show you how to construct that so that I can add the other end of the necklace, which will be the chain. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 petals, and I'll be back to show you the 5th. As you can see, I've now completed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of the shiny gold petals that sit at the back, and I'm just about to make petal number 8. Now petal number 8, if I flip this over, petal number 8 needs to attach to petal number 7 and petal number 1 through that second bead up the side, and it also needs to connect to the chain. So let's start by putting on 2 beads and making the connection to petal number 7. So it's 2 seed beads on, down through the second one, up the side of the petal number 7, back through the second bead we've just put on to make our square stitch. And now we're going to put on the 4 beads to take us up to the tip of the petal. There we go. I'm going to just flip that over so we've got it showing the right side. Now when this is complete, there'll be 2 gold petals at the top and 1, 2, 3, 4 gold petals beneath the connection to the bee on one side and the chain on the other. That means that this is the right way up at the moment. It should hang with the 4 petals towards the bottom of the necklace. Now if we're being super professional about this, the clasp side of the chain should go on the right hand side of the necklace when it's worn. So because we're looking at this in reverse, it's not how it's worn, it's how we would look at it, we need to join that end of the chain on to this petal tip so that when it flips round, this will be on the right hand side. Now I'm going to join directly onto the chain. I need to make sure that I'm joining onto the right end of the chain link. Now the chain link has got a break in it, and if you look very carefully you can see which end of the chain link has got the break in, which is this end, and this end of the chain link doesn't. So that's the end I'm interested in. I'm going to go through the chain link and back down 2 seed beads, and that pulls the chain up. 1, 2, 3 seed beads. I haven't put on 4 seed beads because I want to join on to that bead there, the second bead up on the very first side of petal number 1, and that means it's 1, 2, 3 beads down from the point. So I've put on 3 seed beads, so this last seed bead I've put on will match up with that one there. Now this time the stitch points away from the candy bead first and then to the third bead we just put on, and that makes our square stitch. I just need to make sure that's pulled up nice and tight, and one bead to make it up to the right bead count for the petal side, and down through the last brick stitch bead. There we go. And so we've now got our sunflower complete, and it's attached to our little bee. Now I need to reinforce the petals around the candy bead, especially this connection to the chain and this connection to the bee. So I'm going to go back up through the adjacent candy bead, through the adjacent seed bead, sorry, that's been brick stitched on. So I can go back up through that petal I've just made. So it's up through the seed beads. These are the shiny gold seed beads of the large petal. That's better. Trick to all these things is holding it right through the chain link and back down. Now I've come back down just the petal beads. So the thread has gone up. It had to go up through this brick stitch bead at the bottom so I could get in the right place. And it's gone up through the petal beads, through the chain link and down again. Now I'm not going to go through the brick stitch beads because they'll be too tight. So I'm just going to go up through the petal beads of the next petal around. This is gold, the shiny gold petals at the back. Through the anchor bead at the top and back down the other side of the petal. Let's see that. That's because I've pulled the top of that petal quite tight. The thread is struggling to fit back through, which is a good thing because it means that the beadwork is firm. And then we go down through this side of the petal. So I've now strengthened this petal and this petal. Again, I'm going to skip past the brick stitch and I'm going to go up that petal and down and up that and reinforce that connection there and down and all the way around. And if the needle will fit, I'm going to reinforce the connection to the chain again before I finish off the thread end. So I finished my reinforcing and I did manage to get the needle all the way around and an extra pass through that connection to the chain, which I'm really pleased about. And now all we need to do is connect the bottom of the bee to the other side of the chain. Now you should have left the thread coming out of this bottom bead, so it's through the chain again. Make sure you're attaching to the end of the chain where the open end of the link isn't. So it's through the link, through the black bead, pull it up nice and tight and you should be able to repeat this stitch 4, perhaps 5 times to make sure it's secure. There we go. All that remains is finishing off the thread end, and we will have finished all the beading for our new necklace. If you want to make it a little bit extra secure, I've got some nail polish here. It's just a clear one, and I'm going to take a tiny dab, and I'm just going to paint where the thread goes through the chain, because it stops any wear and tear, or it helps prevent wear and tear, and it also stops the link in the chain turning round and potentially causing the thread to pull through the gap. So there we have our lovely bee visiting a sunflower necklace. I hope you'll enjoy making one for yourself. Thank you very much.